Okay, everybody, welcome to today's round 2 of the Malayan Interschool Debate Championships. So on the motion that this House prefers climate change, this House would prioritize climate change adaptation over climate change prevention. I would like to call the Prime Minister.
Thai government believes that adaptation is better than prevention. And today, as the Prime Minister, in my speech, I am going to be defining the motion and giving you 2 arguments to establish why we believe in Thai government that adapting to climate change does more harm than good than preventing climate change, which is essentially fighting a lost cause. Before I begin, let me give certain definitions to certain key phrases in our motion today. Climate change is the impacts humans cause to the climate that can bring negative consequences to the environment and the living things in these environments. And climate change prevention is an effort to reduce greenhouse gases, such as sustainable energy and carbon capture. Meanwhile, carbon change adaptation chooses to lower these risks by fighting that are posed by these consequences by using methods such as drugs and crops and flood defenses. Now, let me move on to my first argument, which is that climate change is inevitable. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a society which is so reliant on fossil fuels and all these things that can bring such harms to our environment. And since we know that this is inevitable, since we know that this will happen anyway, since we know that humans always produce toxic substances that constantly harm the environment and the things in it, we should focus not on preventing climate change, which is something that is going to happen in some period of time, which is something that's going to happen anyway. Instead, we should focus on constantly fighting this and on constantly combating climate change to lower the risk of climate change by protecting the people and the things that live in our climate. Because climate change prevention is like fighting a lost cause. We know it's going to happen. It's a losing battle that we can never win. So our best case is to accept it, to move forward with it, and to work towards a more realistic solution to this problem. Let's take side opposition at their best case. You find sustainable energy funding, but there is no guarantee that there's no guarantee that people will still use these environmentally friendly ways, especially people who are less privileged. Because let's be real, these solutions are often a lot more expensive and need a lot more funding. But in the worst case scenario, where these experimental techniques to prevent climate change don't work, the organization that tries this, that does this, will lose a lot of capital. It's a lot of loss of money, loss of resources, and this money could have been spent on stuff like drought-resistant crops or flood defenses, which can at least momentarily lower the risk of climate change. We should work with what we are given with, rather than fighting this lost cause, this lost battle that we know we won't win. Moving on, I've touched on this earlier. It's a huge waste of resources to try and prevent climate change. Because, like I said earlier, we have no confirmation that these experiments to prevent climate change could work, such as coal fusion, and even the ones that we know could work, like solar power and hydroelectricity. They need a lot of funding, and a lot of money is needed to maintain them, a lot of money is needed to work on them. Which is why we don't want to focus on this. We would rather focus on building a more sustainable course that can last us a longer time. With a lost fight, with losing a fight, when we lose this fight for climate prevention, we can focus more on climate adaptation, where we understand, Thai government accepts that climate change will happen anyway, that climate change is inevitable. We accept this, and we instead choose to work on lowering the risk because we know that climate change will bring harm to us. Climate change will come. It's not something that we can completely crush. It's not something that we can completely fight. So instead, we adapt to it, we accept it, we adapt to this change, and we learn how to live with it, we learn how to work with it. Stuff like drought preventing plants and flood barriers, even though still expensive, are more likely to work and cost less than stuff like hydroelectricity and solar energy. And an organization working on preventing climate change will experience much more of a loss of capital in general than an organization working on adapting the situation and focusing on the more positive aspects of the situation. And this is why Thai government clearly believes that we should prioritize climate change adaptation because it brings more harm and good to the society as a whole than climate change prevention. And this is why we should go with Thai government.
Thank you for that speech. Now let's welcome the Leader of Opposition. Okay, sorry about earlier.
Can I have
Oh, sure.
nature wants us to believe that mankind has not failed the environment. Newsflash, mankind has failed. Yes, we have failed. We say that we are just reinforcing the fact that we have failed. We say, yes, we have failed the environment. That is already in the status quo. We have treated this world like complete shit, and that is a known fact. What you're trying to do is saying that we can somehow undo the fact that we have treated the world like shit, which is impossible. We need to understand the consensus that it's impossible that we to undo the way we have already treated this world. And what we can do is deal with the outcomes instead of dealing with the root cause. Why? Because we cannot deal with the root cause because new problems crop up, which I will lead to next. First, then they said that defending is just the top of it in response to my POI that they said, we are aware, if people are not aware, they will just defend. Defense is an outcome of being aware. If we are aware, we will defend against it. And they said, no, but being aware will mean that they will prevent it. Defense is the best way for people to be aware, for people who are already aware, to fix the problem. Because defense is the best use of our resources, like my PM already said, it's the best use of what we already have. In their world, new problems just keep cropping up, and they try to want to prevent every single problem. If there's like more carbon emissions, let's prevent that. If there are too much carbon monoxide, or there's too little natural resources, they're trying to prevent every single minor problem that comes up. However, we are dealing with the overall outcomes of these problems, which they have not solved at all. They are looking at the long-term side, but what about the short term? We're saying that the short term is just as important. What about the people now? The people now have no prevention. If you're just looking at the future generations, what about now? There's nothing that they're doing to help the people on the ground now, and that's the problem. We think that upgrading our defenses as the population increases is the best course of action. Because if the population increases, which will happen on their side as well, if the population increases, new problems will just crop up. And if we want to prevent every single new problem, that will be a waste of resource, waste of capital, waste of time, waste of money. And we think that we can just use that capital that they would use for preventing to further upgrade our already existing defenses or our already adaptational things that we've already made. So this is why we think that we have a better use of these resources. Well, let me move on to my defense of the case. First, climate change is inevitable, like what my PM said. Climate change is inevitable. Why? Because we cannot do anything without fossil fuels in this day and age. There is no way that we can suddenly just immediately switch to solar energy. Why? Because it's damn expensive. Solar energy, hydroelectricity, nuclear energy, they're all damn expensive causes or damn expensive ways for us to move away from these fossil fuels. And we are so reliant on these fossil fuels that if it was taken away from us, or that if there were new things, there is no guarantee that they will move to this sustainable energy because companies are profit-based. Governments are profit-based. They want to save money. And they're not going to go to this new experimental thing in the idea that, maybe we will save the generation. No, they want to make money now. They're all about the here and now. And this is why we don't, in preventing it, we are finding a losing cause. Because as we said, there's no way that this sustainable energies will work out, or there's no way that we can confirm that the capital spent on these ones will be worth the thing. However, when we build defenses, when we make defenses, it's a confirmed fact that it will almost certainly work. It's a tried and tested method instead of experimental. So what is the comparative here? In their best case, in their best case, this prevention works. But even if it works, there's no guarantee that companies will buy into it. There's no guarantee that they will want to follow all these alternative sources because these are expensive, these are time-consuming, these have expenses to maintain, and companies don't want that. They want the cheapest possible way with the highest productivity so that they can make the most profit. And in their worst case, the money and capital spent into these experimental technologies don't work. Cold fusion doesn't work, or carbon capture, suddenly something goes wrong, and they just lose a whole bunch of capital, a whole bunch of resources, all just gone down the drain. And that capital, that resources could have been better spent in surefire ways that work, like the adaptation that we have brought to you today. Because climate change will never go away. Even in their world, climate change still happens. By preventing it, they are just trying to fight losing battles against the root causes. However, we are mitigating the outcomes slowly and surely. We are mitigating the outcomes. So yes, we admit to the fact that climate change, the causes of climate change will still be there. However, the outcomes in our world compared to outcomes in their world is so much less. The harms in our world is so much less if we adapt to it. Why? This is because in their world, they maybe win 1-2 battles against prevention. Oh sure, we have limited the resources by a full 10% for 2 factors. However, in our world, we lower the harms across the board. We lower We lower the outcomes across the board, we lower the harms across the board, because we adapt to every single thing that's been happening. So okay, they may lower the risk by 10% for 2 factors. We lower 5% for every single factor. So therefore, in our world, the harms are much less in comparison to them. And bringing back to the waste of resources, yeah, even sustainable energies, even surefire sustainable energies like solar power and hydrogen are expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and once destroyed, there goes your capital, my friend. There is no way that they can get the money back or get it back to do something different because it's gone. All the money that they have spent on some surefire way is now gone. However, when we talk about coal emissions, carbon emissions from petroleum and natural gas, these are cheap ways to do. Because the extraction mechanism, the way that we extract it or the way that we refine it has already been perfected over the years. Since the Industrial Revolution, the 1900s till now, in 2019, we have almost perfected ways to extract coal, oil, and natural gas. And yes, we admit that these things may run out. However, we are adapting to the change. We are adapting to it running out. That means we can have laws to restrict the amount of carbon dioxide because restrict the amount of oil being extracted or restrict the amount of natural gas being extracted. But what they're trying to say is no, we will just stop natural gas production, stop oil production because we are preventing the cost. And because this is the cost, we will prevent it. And now all companies have to use solar power. And that's what they're trying to say. All companies have no choice but use solar power. And this will can possibly lead to an underground market for stuff like oil, natural gas, coal. And they have no way to fight this thing. However, we legitimize all these sources, and however, in their world, they prevent it, they stop the production of all this, because that is preventing the root cause of climate change, but we are adapting to it. We limit the amount, however, they just stop the amount entirely. And this is why we feel that opening government has won this case, and you should side with opening government. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech, Vivian. I will now like to invite the leader of the opposition.
Here.
As the quote goes, prevention is better than cure. But how is prevention ever applicable if these sort of things has already been happening in our world today? Things like deforestation, right? The things that both houses that have already talked about so much more. But what we're going to talk about in today's debate, right? Firstly, we're going to talk about the problem statement that we see in today's debate. Secondly, the purpose and goals. And then thirdly, the policy that somehow both of these houses have not really characterize how these things look like in this world. Don't let them run away from these sort of mischaracterizations. We will be the first house to actually tell you what we see fit, what the government's best interest we should do to make sure that these things work. Finally, the arguments and the comparisons under both sides. So, firstly, right, but before that, the rebuttals. The only thing that came out from the opening opposition was the fact that, people cut down trees. So therefore, they should take the burden, they should deal with the consequences that they have. But keep in mind that the biggest culprit of these horrible, these horrible pollutions and things, right, are the stakeholders, well known as corporations. These corporations are most oftentimes really incentivized in earning a profit. Everything is totally unfair for opposition to come up to say that, these people, the people on the ground, deserve to suffer because of whatever they have done. We think that the biggest culprit should be the corporations, and we should deal with under these corporations and what governments should do against these sort of people, right? But also secondly, secondly about the problem statement that we see, right? Realize that in places like, for example, a landlocked country in Malawi, which is Malawi, where things that have droughts happen during May to June. And we think this is really problematic because under these sort of countries, these people suffer, right? They don't get crops, their crops die. We think it's so much more worse on their side because they can never get food on their tables. But what is our purpose and goal that we see in today's debate? Firstly, how we can actually preserve the environment so much more better than what opposition can do by adapting towards it. And also secondly, about how we can actually make sure that more people's lives are safe under our side, under opposition. Opposition has to come up and say why these people are somehow going to be safe, or why these people should deserve to suffer either way. I don't really see these sort of things that are happening in today's debate, but also moving on towards the policy, right? Firstly, under CG, which came out really late, right? Let's be honest. We would build things like climate change, adaptation related infrastructure in places that need them. Like for example, Malawi, where we give them more drought resistant crops for these countries that are suffering. Or in places that have floods, we're going to build flood dams or flood protection walls to make sure that these places are protected, that these people under their side are protected. So what is our principal argument in today's debate? And we are actually the first house to actually talk about this. Is the fact that why it's the government's obligation to make sure that they help the people on the ground, right? Because when they see the people suffering, and it's also the government's, it is the governments that should be in charge of protecting these people for their interests to stay in power or get into office, right? So because of this, right, these governments have an incentive to make sure to help these people either way. But also secondly, about why it's the best interest for governments to do this in the first place, right? Because we realize time and time again, we try to stop companies or corporations who are really profit incentivized from emitting greenhouse gases or have a polluted environment. And we like things like law enforcement, right? But times and times again, it has been proven ineffective. These corporations don't care, they still continue to pollute the environment either way. And like for example, even the Green New Deal that has happened a few weeks has been rejected because it shows how much that these people don't really care about the environment. And we think it's so much more better under our side for the government to make sure to protect these people who are affected by these climate changes. So secondly, but also my second level analysis, why climate change prevention will not work for companies, because these corporations don't really care, because they want to get their profit incentivized. So therefore, they make sure to get the cheapest and the fastest solution in order to get their products or whatever. And we think it's so much more worse on their side, because even though governments continue to give law enforcement laws to somehow stop these people from cutting down trees, times and times again, it has been proven that it does not work. It's not as effective. These corporations will still somehow get these resources illegally or not, just to make sure that they get these profits, right? So what is the trade-off that we're willing to make, right? Because we rather trade off the fact that we might fix climate change in the long term a bit slower, but at least under our side, we actually make an active choice to protect the people who are suffering under these sides. So this comes up to our results and our comparison, right? Which is, but before that, any rebuttals? Pure. No, okay. So the fact that on the comparison, right? On the long-term and short-term scale, on the short term, we actually help the people who are suffering. We actually help the people who are suffering from floods, deforestation, whatever, right? We save these people by giving them the infrastructure that they need to be protected. So therefore, we save more lives than what opposition can do. Because the only thing that the government would do is that they would only prioritize onto climate change prevention, only push like law enforcement to its corporations, but nothing really is effective, as I said for many times. But also on the long term, right? Like even if they work, right? Because under their best case, I think it's really convenient for both sides to say that resources are used effectively, or somehow it wouldn't work. But we see that even if it works, ours is still better, because the amount of people who lost their lives, right, is so much more worse under the long term, even though you get solar panel energy in the end. Because in the end, these people still die well, at least under our side. Sure, on the long-term scale, we are a bit slower, but we still save more people regardless. We save the people who deserve to be protected, and it's so much more better under government because of this.
Very much. I would now like to invite a member for the opposition to give. Yeah.
I would like to start off with some rebuttals. First, with the opening government, the Prime Minister said that less privileged people would not be able to access all. It's hard for them to not use fossil fuels, to use like solar power, hydroelectric. She said the less privileged will be harder for them to pay for it. But that's just talking about short term. What about the long term? In the long term, right? You see when you're spending money on all these flood defenses and drought-resistant crops. Don't you think that the government would need more funding, and then that would just increase the tax, and in the end, the less privileged people in the long run they still have to pay a lot of money. Okay. Another thing is the DPM said that she said that their defenses are all gonna like the solar power, energy and hydroelectric. These things are not sure and they're probably all gonna fail. But I feel like that's not really true, because how sure are you that it's gonna fail? Of course, they're gonna have like people like running tests to make sure that these things don't fail. It's not like it's yes.
Isn't it? Won't they pay less if they build surefire defenses than extremely breakable, extremely expensive mechanisms that can break down like solar power comparative to solid things like dams and walls?
Please can you repeat that again?
Wouldn't they pay less if they were to build dams and walls that are strong and sure, compared to if they had to pay for constantly maintaining a very breakable solar power or hydroelectric dam?
I don't know why you keep assuming that solar power and hydroelectric dams are so breakable. Of course, they're going to use like good quality materials to build these, right? Okay, and then the opening jobs world, they say that they are using fossil fuels. They're not. It's not saying that they are going to use fossil fuels, but they never specify what's going to happen when they run out of fossil fuels. And then closing government said the farmers' crops are dying, but how available are these drought-resistant crops? How available are they to the farmers, and how cheap are they? I mean, if they are expensive, how do the farmers afford them? Okay, so I'm gonna go to my expansions and points. So first things, like, people have made mistakes, and it's not too late for them to solve this problem of the world being like in the state it is in now. In government's world, they're just accepting that they made a mistake and moving on. But in ops world, we accept that we made a mistake, but we're trying to solve this problem. We're trying to overcome it. So this is my argument. The condition the world is in now, it's gonna worsen over time. Like in Gov's world, right? They say that they're gonna build dams and flood defenses and drought resistant crops. But what if the condition continues to worsen? What if the droughts become longer and then floods are more liable to occur and in more intensity? They're just gonna have to keep adapting, making it better. And in the long run, right, this is just gonna waste a lot of resources, such as time and money. And people are just gonna have to constantly change their lifestyle. So talking about money, improving these flood defenses, right, and drought-resistant crops, this list just doesn't stop there. It's gonna get longer and longer. All the minor problems that they say it's okay if you just leave them. Over time, these minor problems are going to become major problems, and then they will need to solve them as well. And animals are going extinct, plants are dying, the ozone layer is being destroyed. And to solve all, I'm not saying that it's impossible to solve all these problems, but what I'm saying is it's rather costly to try and solve these problems because you're going to need a lot of money and time. Time. People will be wasting a lot of time and effort trying to adapt to these. People are going to be wasting a lot of time and effort trying to solve these problems, trying to adapt to them. But what we're doing now is, in Ops World, we are taking these problems and we are solving them now, so that the condition does not worsen over time. Okay, so I'm just gonna go straight ahead to my comparison. In Gauss world, people are just gonna put off the problem, and the problem is just gonna get worse and worse. And whereas in Ops world, we are solving this problem now, and we are not trying to maneuver out of it. So this problem will not bother us again in Ops world if we solve it now.
Thank you very much for the speech. I would now like to invite the government whip to close the case.
So in my speech today, I'm going to be doing a few things. Firstly, a few rebuttals, and then moving on to my two main issues of today's debate. Firstly, rebuttals for the member of opposition, right? So they wanted to tell us how on our world, on Gauss world, there will be more time and effort spent into trying to adapt to these climate change issues, right? So I think on their world, a world where they try to enforce laws or host campaigns against climate change, I think in their world is more likely to spend more time and effort, right? Because governments have to spend time and effort into enforcing these laws, into making sure that companies actually follow it. I think there is more of a waste of time and effort on their side, but I'll explain more of that later, right? So what is my first issue for today's debate? So which course of action is more likely to work? And then my second issue is which side saves more in terms of environmental preservation and lives, right? So first issue, on which course is more likely to work? So what did my member of government come up and tell you today? So we told you that it's very unrealistic for you to expect that companies will automatically follow these climate change prevention laws that you're going to enforce, right? So why is it unrealistic? It's because companies and corporations are really profit incentivized. So this means that if you're going to make laws that will limit their business by making sure that they have to spend money on like degrading their waste and all of that, I think these companies and corporations are not very likely to follow these laws because they are profit incentivized. They want to make profit. This will hinder their business. This is why it's not as likely for climate prevention like laws to be enforced on their side as they characterize it to be, right? So why is it on our side that adaptation is easier and more likely and more efficient to take place, right? Because in our world, so sure that climate change adaptation will require some amount of money and time, right? But we tell you that this adaptation, this money and time that they spend, it's a worthy trade-off because in the long run, less lives will be lost because you are efficiently protecting these people from the problems that climate change brings, and in the long run, less time and effort will be wasted because now in their world you have to keep enforcing laws into trying to convince these companies, trying to enforce these companies into having less waste and into causing less climate change. So moving on to my second issue, right? So I think closing government is the only side in this debate that's willing to tackle the best and worst case, right? So let's say that assuming the best case on side opposition's world, right? So let's assume that somehow these companies will listen to this, will actually try to prevent climate change. Let's assume that we're taking the best case in opposition's world, right? So why is our world still better? So what happens on their side? So maybe companies try to try to reduce their greenhouse gases emissions. Maybe the government does try to like do things such as carbon capture or storing greenhouse gases underground. So these things take a lot more time and money, right? Because these things require like tons and tons of research, tons and tons of capital for these research to take place, right? It requires all these resources. So what happens in these years that all of this is trying to take place? The thing is that while this thing is taking place, we have to understand that climate change is already happening, right? You can't really prevent something that's already happening. So what does this mean? It means that in the years that you are wasting into trying to prevent climate change, there's stuff like floods and droughts, right, which result in lives being lost, which results in collateral damage, lots and lots of destruction. The point in which this happens is you're willing to trade off something that might happen, which will take a long time for lives and money and collateral. So why is it better on our side? So we tell you that although we are not addressing the roots of the problem, we are addressing something more important, right? So why is this important that we address the current status quo problems, for example, lives being lost and collateral damage and stuff like that? Why are we willing to make the trade-off, right? So firstly, we tell you that the government, who is the one that's carrying out all these climate change adaptation and climate change prevention laws, we tell you that the government is obligated, its main focus is obligated to protect people on the ground. These people on the ground that are suffering because of climate change, right? Secondly, we tell you, I'd like to repeat the principle that is brought up by the member of government, which is that these people haven't directly caused climate change, unlike what side opening opposition has characterized. These people aren't responsible. It is the corporations and companies that are the main culprit for these climate change problems, right? The point in which you are willing to trade off like time for these people who are suffering when they haven't even caused it. So we don't think it's fair for side opposition to make this trade-off. We think it's fair for you to address to help these people on the ground that are suffering for something they haven't caused. So it's not fair for governments to spend time and effort on companies when they are just neglecting people on the ground by not spending money on defenses. We think this money is properly spent, right? So what happens when we are willing to make this trade-off? So we tell you that there's only a chance that these climate change prevention laws are going to work, right? So we're not willing to take this chance because there are already people dying. There's already loss of lives. There's lots of damage, and it's just going to be amplified in the near future. When if we don't try to protect these people, these problems are going to be amplified. I don't think this is something that side opposition is trying to address. Secondly, even if it does work, the cost of it is too large, right? So even if this somehow miraculously does work, even if companies do listen, I think the cost of it is that lots of people die, and this will be amplified in the near future. And secondly, lots of money will be wasted, and I don't think this is something that developing countries will afford. And so these two things just make climate change prevention issues, even if they do work. I think it's not fair for you to impose these laws when people on the ground are going to suffer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Government. Now I would like to invite the opposition with those areas and hope they're here.